Title: Gilles Deleuze on Cinema, What is a Creative Act? I would like to ask some questions of myself and to ask some of you, as well as of myself. This would be the type: what do you do? What do you make exactly? You who make cinema. And me, what do I do? When I hope to do, when I make philosophy. Is there anything we can say to this? Of course, this is a difficult question. It's as painful for you as it is for me. It's not only this that we would have to say. I could very well formulate the question in another way. What is it to have an idea in cinema? If one makes cinema, or if one wants to make cinema, what is it to have an idea, specifically at the moment that one says, I have an idea? Everyone knows that to have an idea is a rare event. It occurs infrequently. To have an idea is a sort of celebration. It does not happen every day. In another way, to have an idea is not a general thing. We do not have an idea in general. An idea is always consecrated, all as if he who has an idea has already consecrated it in such or such a domain. What I would like to explain is that sometimes an idea in painting, sometimes an idea in a novel, sometimes an idea in philosophy, and sometimes an idea in science are evidently not all the same thing. Ideas should be treated as types of potentials, as consecrated potentials, potentials that are already engaged in one or another mode of expression and that are inseparable from that mode of expression. So that I cannot have an idea in general. Depending on the techniques that I know, I can have an idea in a domain, an idea in cinema or some other thing, an idea in philosophy. What is it to have an idea in something? So I speak again about the fact that I make philosophy and you make cinema. It would then be too simple to state that yes, everyone knows that philosophy is made to reflect upon everything. So why then does it not think about cinema? Now this is a base idea. Philosophy is not made for reflecting on anything. It is not made to reflect on other things. I mean that in treating philosophy as a force which reflects upon, we seem to give it a great deal, but in fact we take everything away from it. Because in fact no one has need of philosophy to think or reflect. The only people capable of thinking about cinema are filmmakers or film critics or those who love cinema. They absolutely don't need philosophy in order to think about cinema. The idea that mathematicians would need philosophy in order to think about mathematics is quite comical. If philosophy was made to think about something, it would have no reason to exist. Thus, if philosophy exists, it's because it has its own content. If we ask ourselves what the content of philosophy is, it is very simple. Philosophy is a discipline equally as creative, equally as inventive as any other discipline. Philosophy is a discipline that consists in the creation or invention of concepts. Concepts do not just exist. Concepts do not just exist in the sky, where they are waiting for the philosophers to come and seize them. Concepts must be fabricated. Of course, they are not made just like that. One does not say to oneself, okay, I am going to make a concept, I am going to invent a concept. No more than a painter says to himself one day, okay, I'm going to make a painting just like that. There must be a necessity, in philosophy as elsewhere, as the filmmaker does not say, hey, I'll make this movie. There must be a necessity, otherwise there is nothing at all. Still, this necessity is a very complex thing, if it exists. At least I know that a philosopher is not responsible for reflecting on cinema. He proposes to invent or create concepts. I say that I make philosophy, which is to say that I try to invent concepts. I do not try to reflect on other things. If I say to you who make cinema, what do you make? Accord me this puerile definition, even if there are better ones. I will not say that you invent, not concepts. That is not your task. What you invent is what might be called blocks of movement time. If one fabricates blocks of movement time, perhaps one is making cinema. Notice that this has nothing to do with invoking a certain story, nor rejecting one. Everything has a story. Philosophy also tells stories. Philosophy tells stories and speaks of concepts. Cinema, I believe, say, suppose, tells stories with blocks of movement time. I could say that painting invents another type of block, which is neither blocks of concepts nor of movement time, but let's suppose that they are blocks of lines and colors. Music invents another type of very, very particular block. What I am saying in all this is that science is no less, science is not any less creative. I do not see so much opposition between science, art, and all that. If I ask a scientist, what does he do? Again, he invents, he does not discover, or at least a scientist does discover something. It is a part, but it is not how we define scientific activity as such. A scientist invents and creates as much as an artist. Today, if anyone can speak to anyone, if a filmmaker can speak to a man of science, if a man of science has something to say to a philosopher, and vice versa, it is in measure where, and in function with each other, of their creative activities. There is no need to talk about the creation. Creation is something very solitary. There is no need to talk about creation. It is in the name of creation that I have something to say. If I string together all these disciplines that are defined by their creative activity, it is because they have a common limit, and the limit that is common to all these series of inventions, inventions of functions, inventions of blocks of movement, time, inventions of concepts, and so on. What is common to all these, or the limit of all these? What is it? It is space-time. All of these disciplines communicate together at the level of something which never disengages for itself, but that is engaged in all creative disciplines to know the constitution of space-time. It is well known that there are rarely interior spaces. In Robert Bresson's work, his are spaces that could be called disconnected, which is to say, for example, there is a corner of a cell, and then one will see another corner or another area of the wall, and so on. It is as if Bressonian space presented itself as a series of little bits whose connection between them is not predetermined. To embed two little bits whose connection is not predetermined. There are some great filmmakers who employ contrary strategies, who use whole spaces. I am not saying it's easier to manage whole spaces. There are so many spaces in films, but Bresson's space is a distinct type of space. It has certainly been used again in a very creative way by others who renewed it, but I suppose Bresson was one of the first to make space with little disconnected bits and pieces, i.e., small pieces whose connection is not predetermined. When I said, in any case, in all forms of creation, there is a space-time, and well, there is nothing but that. Well, yes, it is there that Bresson's blocks of movement time are going to tend toward this type of space, among others. The question then becomes, these little bits of visual space of which the connection is not given in advance, by what are they to be connected? They are connected by the hand. This is not a theory, it is not philosophy, it cannot be deduced like that. I am saying that Bresson's type of space and the cinematography, valuation of the hand in the image are obviously linked. I mean the connection of small bits of Bressonian spaces, from the very fact that there are just bits, disconnected bits of space, can be nothing but a manual joining, a connection or at least the exhaustion of the hand in Bresson's entire cinema. We could continue to speak about this at length because it is here that Bresson's blocks of area movement receives, like the character of its creator, the character of this particular space, which is very particular. The hand that comes directly from them. It is only the hand that can effectively make connections from one part of the space to another. Bresson is without a doubt one of the greatest filmmakers for having reintroduced tactile values into cinema, not simply because he knew how to take images of hands, but he knew how to make beautiful images of hands. It is because he needed hands. A creator is not a being that works for pleasure. A creator does nothing but that which he has to do. Again, having an idea in cinema is not the same thing as having an idea elsewhere. There are ideas in cinema that could have some worth in other disciplines. There are ideas in cinema that could be excellent ideas in the novel, but they would not at all have the same allure, and ideas in cinema can only be cinematographic. Even if there are cinematographic ideas that could have value in a novel, ideas in cinema can only be engaged in a cinematographic process. They are consecrated to that process in advance. Yet saying this leads me to another question that is very interesting. What happens when a filmmaker wants to adapt, for example, a novel? If he wants to adapt a novel, it seems evident to me that it is because there are ideas in cinema which resonate with the novel, yet still present ideas particular to the novel. This is what sometimes makes for an extremely great encounter. This is very different. I am not posing the problem of the filmmaker who adapts a notoriously mediocre novel. He may have need of the mediocre novel. It does not exclude the possibility that the film could be great. I am asking a slightly different question. It would be interesting to address this question, but I asked a slightly different question. It is because the novel is great when it awakens this sort of activity where someone has, in cinema, an idea that corresponds to that in the novel. One of the most beautiful examples is the case of Akira Kurosawa. Why is it that Kurosawa finds himself in a sort of familiarity with Shakespeare and Dostoevsky? Why is it that a Japanese filmmaker finds himself in a familiarity with Shakespeare and Dostoevsky? I should tell you, as it seems to me. I can give you one possible response, which is among a million others, and which I believe also touches on philosophy. Under the characterizations of Dostoevsky, there is a minor detail. Under the characterizations of Dostoevsky, something rather curious very often occurs. Generally, his characters are very agitated. A character takes off, goes out towards the street. He tells a woman he loves her. Tanya calls me for help. I go. I am running. I run. Yes, Tanya is going to die if I don't go, and so I go down the staircase and meet a friend or see a run-over dog on the street. He completely forgets. He forgets. He completely forgets that Tanya is waiting for him as she is in the process of dying. He starts to talk just like that, and he comes across another friend, and he goes to have some tea at this friend's house, and then all of a sudden, he says, "Tanya is waiting for me. I have to go." What does this all mean? It is there in Dostoevsky that the characters are perpetually taken by urgency. At the same time that they are taken by this urgency, questions of life and death, they still know that there is another question that is even more urgent, even if they are not exactly sure what it is. And that is what stops them. Everything happens as if in the worst kind of urgency. There is a fire. There is a fire. I have to go. I say to myself, no, no. There is something more urgent, and I will not move as long as I do not know what it is. It is the idiot. That is the idiot. It is an expression of the idiot. He says, no, no, there is a much deeper problem. But what problem? I can't see it very well. But leave me alone. Leave me alone. Everything could burn down to the ground, but nothing happens. One must find out the most urgent problem. It is not Dostoevsky that Kurosawa learns from. All of Kurosawa's characters are like that. I would say there is an encounter, a beautiful encounter. If Kurosawa can adapt Dostoevsky, surely it is because he can say, I share a concern with him. We have a common problem, that exact problem. Kurosawa's characters are in exactly the same situation. They are engaged in impossible situations. Ah, yes, there is an urgent problem, but I have to know what problem is most urgent. Perhaps Ikiru is one of Kurosawa's films that goes the furthest in this sense, but all of Kurosawa's films go in this direction. The Seven Samurai is very powerful for me. It is because all of Kurosawa's space is dependent on the necessity that it be sort of oval space that is drenched by the rain. Finally, nothing would take too much time, because there, too, we will cross again the limits of space-time. The characters of the Seven Samurai are taken by urgent situations. They have agreed to defend a village, yet they are taken by a more profound question. There is a more profound question around all this. This question will be articulated by the leaders of the samurai toward the end of the film when he asks, "What is a samurai?" What is a samurai, not in general, but what is a samurai during this epoch? Someone who no longer serves a purpose, noblemen that we no longer have use for, and peasants that will soon know how to defend themselves without any assistance. And throughout the film, despite the urgency of the situation, the samurais are haunted by this question which is deserving of the idiot, which is in fact the idiot's question. We samurai, what are we? Here it is. I would call it an idea in cinema. It is of this type. You would reply to me and say no, because it is in fact an idea proper to the novel. But the idea in cinema becomes as such because it is simultaneously engaged in a cinematographic process. You would say to me, I have an idea, one that you borrow from Dostoevsky. Again I say, I believe that an idea, it is very simple. It is not a concept, it is not philosophy. A concept is something else. Even if one may be able to draw a concept from an idea, consider Vincente Minnelli. Minnelli had an extraordinary idea about dreams. It is a very simple idea. One can engage this idea within the totality of the cinematographic process that is a T-work in Minnelli and in his great work on dreams. It seems to me that Minnelli's idea about dreams concerns those who don't dream. The dream of those who dream concerns those who are not dreaming. And why does this concern them? Because as soon as someone else dreams, there is danger. People's dreams are always devouring and threaten to engulf us. The other's dream is very dangerous. Dreams have a terrible will to power, and each one of us is a victim to the other's dreams. Even the most gracious of young girls is a terrible devourer, not because of her soul, but because of her dreams. Beware of the other's dream, because if you are caught in the other's dreams, you are done for. So you understand, when you have such an idea, the important thing is not to know whether it is true or false. The question is to know if it is important, if it is interesting, and if it is beautiful. And it is the same in science. It is the same in philosophy, you know. I could mention another example, an idea that is rightly cinematography of the famous dissociation between to see and to speak in relatively recent cinema. I shall take the most well-known cases, Cyberberg, the Straubs, and Marguerite Duras. What is it they have in common, and what among them is rightly cinematographic? The disjunction they make between the visual and the audible. Why can't this be done in theatre? Well, it can be done, but if it were applied to the theatre without exception, unless the theatre had the means to do so, it would be theatre that is applying cinema to itself, which is not necessarily bad, but it is such a cinematographic idea to assure the disjunction of the visual and the audible, seeing from speaking. That would be an exemplary response to what, for example, a cinematographic idea is. And everyone knows what this is. A voice speaks of something, someone is talking about something, at the same time as we are shown something else. And finally, that which one is speaking about is actually underneath what we see. This is very important. This third point, you can see that this is not something one can do in theatre. The theatre could follow these first two propositions. We are shown something and we see something else. To be able to speak simultaneously and then to put it underneath that which we see is necessary, or else this disjunctive operation holds no sense and would have no real interest. If you prefer, one could say, the words rise into the air. The words rise into the air as the ground we see drops further down. Or rather, as these words rise into the air, what they are talking about goes underground. What is this if only cinema can do it? I am not saying it has to do it, just that it has done it 2 or 3 times. I can simply say that the great filmmakers had this idea. It is not about saying that it has to be done. Nothing has to be done. Whatever they may be, one must have ideas. I say that is stupendous because it ensures in cinema a veritable transformation of its elements, a cycle of large elements that suddenly makes an impact and fills cinema the echo of, I do not know, a sort of qualitative, physical set of elements. It makes a sort of transformation. The air, the earth, water, and fire must be added. We do not have time here to discover the role of the 2 elements, the large circulation of elements in cinema, the grand circulation of elements in cinema. In everything I say, I am not trying to suppress the story. The story is always there, but what interests us is why the story is so interesting with all of these things behind it, or working with it. In the cycle, I have quickly defined the voice rising, while what the voice is talking about drops under the ground, is what is most recognizable in Straub's films. It is the grand cycle of elements in Straub. It is very important. This cycle he makes, we see only the deserted ground, but this deserted ground seems heavy with what lies underneath it. You may ask me, how do we know what's underneath it? That is precisely what the voice is telling us. It is as if the earth is buckling from what the voice is telling us. It is that which comes to take its place underground when ready. If the earth and if the voice speaks to us of corpses, of the lineage of corpses which comes to take its place underground at that moment, then the slightest whisper of wind on the deserted land, on the empty space that you have before your eyes, the smallest hollow in the earth, will take on all meaning. I consider that having an idea in any case is not of the order of communication. This is the point I was aiming for, because it is a question that has been very kindly posed. Everything we are talking about is irreducible to any communication. This is not a problem. What does that mean? It means, I think, that primarily communication is the transmission and propagation of information. What is information? It is not very complicated. Everyone knows what it is. Information is a set of imperatives, slogans, directions, order words. When you are informed, you are told what you are supposed to believe. In other words, informing means circulating an order word. Police declarations are appropriately called communiques. Information is communicated to us. They tell us what we are supposed to be ready to or have to believe or to believe, that we are bound to believe, and not even believe, but to act as if we believed. We are not asked to believe, but to behave as if we did. That is information, communication. And independently of these order words and their transmission, there is no communication. There is no information. This is the same thing as saying that information is exactly the system of control. It is true, I am speaking platitudes. This is obvious. It is obvious except that it particularly concerns us today. It affects us today because we are entering a society that can be called a society of control. A certain Michel Foucault analyzed 2 types of society relatively close to ours. He called one type sovereign society and the other disciplinary society. He found a typical passage from a sovereign to a disciplinary society which coincided with Napoleon. Disciplinary society was defined. Foucault's analyses have remained famous, and rightly so. It was defined by the establishment of areas of confinement, prisons, schools, workshops, hospitals. Disciplinary societies have need of them. His analysis has given rise to ambiguous interpretations for some readers because they thought it was his final thought. Obviously not. Foucault never believed it and clearly said that disciplinary societies are not eternal. He clearly thought that we are entering into a new type of society. Of course, there have been various remnants of disciplinary societies for many, many years, but we already know we are in societies of a different type that should be called. It is William Burroughs that uses this term, and Foucault had a very deep admiration for Burroughs. Burroughs offers the name. It is very simple: control. We are entering societies of control that move in a different direction than disciplinary societies. I would tell you to take the case of, for example, Jean-Marie Straub, as he operates within this disjunction of voice and sound, in the conditions such as, notice, it is the idea other great writers have taken another way. I believe in the Straubs, they take the following way. This disjunction, once again, the voice rises, it rises, it rises, it rises, and what it is talking about passes under the naked, deserted earth that the visual image is showing us, a visual image that had no relation with the sound image, or rather, that had no direct relation with the sound image. What is this speech act rising in the air while its object passes underground? Resistance, an act of resistance, and in all of Straub's works, the speech act is an act of resistance, from Moses to the later Kafka, including, I am not citing them in order, Not Reconciled, or Bach. Remember the speech act in Bach? What was it? It is his music which is an act of resistance. An act of resistance against what? It is not an abstract act of resistance, it is an active struggle against the separation of the profane and the sacred, and this act of resistance in music ends in a cry. Just as there is a cry in Wozzeck, there is a cry in Bach. Out, out, get out! I don't want to see you. This is an act of resistance. When Straub places an emphasis on this cry, on Bach's cry, or the cry of the old schizophrenic women in Not Reconciled, etc., we realize there are two sides. The act of resistance, it seems, has two faces. It is human, and it is also an act of art. Only the act of resistance resists death, either under the form of the work of art or in the form of human struggle. What relationship is there between human struggle and the work of art? The closest, and for me the most mysterious relationship of all. Exactly what Paul Klee meant when he said, you know, people are missing. The people are missing, and at the same time, they are not missing. The people are missing means that it is not clear, and will never be clear. There is a fundamental affinity between a work of art and a people that does not exist yet. And now, I am finished. It is over. I am very grateful to you for kindly listening to me. Thank you very much. That's all for today. Hope you enjoyed this latest episode, and don't forget to like and subscribe below.